The first sound Daniel Brooks heard that night wasn't the explosion. It wasn't the blast of fire or the shattering of glass or even the deafening roar that would follow. It was a low, primal growl, deep and resonant, rolling in from the hallway like a warning bell in the dark. The sound was urgent, guttural, and unmistakably came from Ranger. It sliced through the stillness of the sleeping house, vibrating through the walls, and straight into Daniel's chest like the premonition of something terrible. He snapped awake, heart pounding like a war drum, the lingering haze of sleep vanishing under the weight of that sound. Beside him, his wife Leah was already stirring, her breath catching in her throat as the growl turned into a series of sharp, frantic scratches coming fast and panicked from their daughter Ava's bedroom door. Before either of them could move, before words could form, the nursery door burst open with a force that made Leah cry out. Ranger barreled through the frame, his massive frame silhouetted by the hallway light. Solid, determined, laser-focused on something only he seemed to understand. "Ranger, no!" Leah shouted, flinging off the covers, her voice laced with shock and fear. But Ranger didn't break stride. He surged across the nursery with terrifying purpose, muscles coiled like springs, and in a fluid, almost graceful motion, he reached Ava's crib. With a gentleness that defied his urgency, he latched onto the fabric of her footed pajamas, careful not to graze her skin. Then, with deliberate precision, he pulled her free, cradling her small body in his jaws like a mission-trained rescuer. Daniel lunged after him, confused panic crashing over him like cold water. But Ranger was already halfway down the hallway, the child dangling safely from his mouth, her sleepy whimpers growing into startled cries. Leah screamed again, racing after the dog, barefoot and breathless, Daniel right behind her, every instinct in his body screaming to stop what felt like madness. Ranger charged toward the back door, shouldered it open with a heavy thud, and disappeared into the cold void of their backyard. They burst into the night after him, the cold air slicing against their skin, and then the world behind them exploded. The shockwave hit first, knocking them off their feet as if the earth itself had lurched. Then came the heat, a searing pulse that roared over their backs like an open furnace. A flash of light swallowed the house they had called home, walls, furniture, photographs, memories, all swallowed by fire and smoke in one terrible instant. Wood shattered, beams cracked, glass screamed as it exploded into shards. The air filled with embers and ash that drifted down like bitter snow. Leah's scream pierced the cacophony, raw and primal, through the settling dust. Daniel's eyes scanned frantically, and then he saw them. There, near the edge of the yard, black and tan fur singed by fire, was Ranger, his body curled protectively around their baby girl, shielding her from the wind and flame. Ava cried, frightened but unharmed, her little limbs squirming against the warmth of the dog's body. For a long moment, Daniel couldn't move. His knees sank into the wet grass, his chest heaving, his hands trembling. Tears blurred his vision. As he crawled to them, gathered Ava into his arms, and pulled her close. She was warm, alive. Only then did the full weight of it settle over him. Ranger hadn't gone wild. He hadn't lost control. He had known somehow, some way, and he had saved them. Long before this night, before he lay curled in smoke-streaked grass guarding a child that wasn't his, Ranger had carried another name. He had once been called Cain, a name earned, not given, a German shepherd forged in discipline and trained by federal forces to detect chemical threats invisible to the human eye. Cain had a gift, his handlers said. His nose could trace danger in molecules. He worked with tireless precision, unwavering loyalty, and the quiet confidence of a creature that understood life and death stakes. But everything changed during one mission, an operation targeting an illegal chemical lab buried deep in the industrial outskirts. Something went wrong. There was an explosion. His handler, the only human he had ever truly bonded with, was killed in an instant. The force of it shattered not only Cain's body but something deeper, something rooted in trust and connection. After that, he was never the same. He stopped obeying. He avoided touch. He growled at unfamiliar hands. He wouldn't eat. The agency labeled him unstable, emotionally broken, no longer reliable. Too much risk, too much damage, They retired him not with honor, but with the form stamped unfit for service, and transferred him to a shelter for dogs like him, trained, troubled, forgotten. Weeks turned into months. Potential adopters came and went. No one wanted the silent, intense German Shepherd with the haunted eyes and scars too deep to see. The staff put a deadline on his file. If no one claimed him by month's end, he would be euthanized. Then Leah walked in, a behavior therapist for trauma-scarred animals. She had seen broken creatures before, but something about this dog, the shadow of what once was, stopped her cold. She looked into his eyes and saw not rage or danger, but grief. Not a monster, but a mourner. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't approach him with fear or pity. She named him Ranger. She gave him space, patience, and time. And in return, slowly, he came back not as Cain the soldier, but as Ranger, the guardian, the protector. And now, wrapped around their baby girl in the burning grass, he had completed a mission no handler could have trained him for. He had chosen to save them, not because he was ordered to, but because something in him still knew how to love. Therapy session was a quiet conversation, often without words. She used scent work, calming touch, and slow steady routine to build his trust. Some days, all they did was sit in silence, while Shadow watched the wind move through the trees. Other days she'd lead him through memory-based exercises, associating gentle comments with positive reinforcement. What broke Heath was the moment Shadow, after weeks of avoidance, voluntarily lay down at her feet. It was an act of surrender, not to authority, but to safety. That's when Leah knew he wasn't beyond hope. Hugh is waiting for someone to speak his language, not commanded. She petitioned the center to continue his rehabilitation under her care. Cher named him Ranger, a fresh start for a soul that had seen too much. When she brought him home, Daniel was hesitant, but Leah believed this dog deserved a second chance. Leah's decision to bring Shadow home wasn't impulsive, it was deeply personal. She saw herself in him. Somi Anuho had experienced loss, who carried wounds invisible to others. She believed in rehabilitation not as a service, but as a promise that no being, human or animal, is ever too far gone. When Shep proposed to adopt him, she told the center, he doesn't need another handler, he needs a home, a family. Bringing Shadow home wasn't about rescue, it was about redemption for both of them. When Lee brought Ranger home, the shift in Hizzies was almost immediate. Leah hadn't been pregnant when she brought Ranger home. At that time, she and Daniel were still adjusting to a quieter life, accused on work and finding a rhythm as a couple in their new home. It was only months later that Leah discovered she was expecting. The pregnancy came as a surprise, and with complications her doctor warned of low energy levels, nutritional sensitivity, and the need for stress reduction. It wasn't the kind of pregnancy that allowed for much independence. Daniel, a construction engineer, did what he could to help. Booth was the sole breadwinner. Projects ran long, deadlines were tight. Most weeks left before sunrise and returned after dark. He worried constantly, but Lee reassured him she'd manage. What neither of them expected was how Ranger would step in, not as a pet, but as a partner. He no longer looked over his shoulder for threats. Instead, he wandered the corners of their modest home with a quiet curiosity, still alert, still cautious, but no longer trapped in survival mode. Daniel, ever the realist, had his doubts. A rescue dog with a trauma record, living under the same roof as an expectant mother. It felt risky. But day after day, Ranger proved himself with quiet consistency. He followed Leah from room to room, settled beside her during her hardest hours, and remained still when she needed sleep. Her pregnancy was difficult, complications low, energy emotional lows. Daniel did his best to support her, but long hours on construction sites kept him away more than he liked. Ranger filled that absence with presence. He didn't ask, he simply stayed whether Leah was crying, vomiting, or asleep in an armchair. He was always there, guarding, not out of command but connection. When Ava was born, Ranger urgently stepped forward, sniffed her as if offering a silent greeting, then laid down beside her crib. From that moment on, hesitantly embraced the role of guardian, watching over Ava with unwavering devotion and a newfound sense of duty. Visitors often remarked on how calm the dog was, but Leah knew better. It wasn't calm, it was purpose. Ranger had found his mission again. The first signs were small. Ranger stopped eating his meals. At first they thought it was just a mood. He'd sniff his bowl, then walk away slowly. Next came the pacing, circling the living room, then the hallway, then back again. Almost every night, his nails click against the floor in restless rhythm. Thun came the nights by the vent. He'd lay beside the floor grates for Hortius, ears alert, nose twitching, constant slazomides. He'd whimper low and long, staring at the baseboards like he expected something to crawl out. More than once, Leah caught him sitting perfectly still, eyes fixed on the basement door. He started scratching at the door once, twice, then turning to look at her, waiting, wanting her to see what he sensed. Daniel brushed it off. Maybe he's hearing raccoons or something under the house. Leo wasn't so sure. There was something about his posture, tense but not aggressive, like he was trying to communicate. But life was hectic. Ava had trouble sleeping. Daniel was hardly home. Leah chalked it up to nerves, but Ranger didn't let up. He began blocking Ava's path. When she crawled near the heater vents, if Leah picked up the baby and moved to sit by the wall, Ranger would follow, circling once before lying down between them and the vent, his body always positioned like a barrier. Some enemies in the quiet early morning should stand in the hallway and bark on Sid just once, then sit unmoving until someone noticed him. Sometimes they did. Often they did. It wasn't just one behavior. It was all of them. Repeated, layered, escalating. And all of it. If they had only known how Toriad. It was a warning. The night, if the air felt strangely still. Leah had just finished putting Ava to sleep. Daniel was in the kitchen washing the last of the bottles. Ranger lay in the hallway, head resting on his paws. Both his eyes never closed. At exactly 11:12 p.m. Ranger sprang up without a sound, sprinted down the hallway, turned sharply into Ava's room, and in one swift motion pulled her blanket aside with his teat hand, nudged her with his nose. The baby stirred. He nudged again, firmer this time, then gently grabbed her onesie and began to. Leah, hearing a low growl, rushed down the hall. "What are you doing?" she cried out, half panicked. Daniel dropped the bottle and ran after her. They turned the corner just in time to see Ranger pulling Ava, still half asleep, out of the crib. Before they could react, he was already halfway down the hall with hair in his grip. In that instant, every instinct in them screamed. Daniel's heart stopped. Leah froze, unable to process what she was seeing. Her baby being pulled from the crib by the jaws off her dog. For a split second, fear overtook reason. Was Ranger attacking? Had something snapped? Leah let out a choke scream, her body refusing to move fast enough. Daniel's pulse pounded in his ears as he lunged forward, not knowing whether to pull Ranger away or shield Ava. "Ranger, stop!" Daniel shouted, but Ranger didn't. He barreled through the back door, pushing it open with his holder, and vanished into the backyard. Leah screamed. Daniel chased, but then the world behind them exploded. Aurora, fire, glass and smoke surged outward, lifting them off their feet. The house shattered, wood torn from nails, heat engulfing the night. Every memory, every photo, every piece of their lives turned into flame in an instant. The shock paralyzed them for a moment, then Lee screamed again. Ava. Through the smoke they saw him, Ranger, his fur blackened around the edges, lying curled tight, lying Ava on the grass. She was crying, covered in ash, but alive, unharmed. Danny collapsed beside them, clutching his daughter. Leah dropped to her knees, sobbing. The yard was chaos, neighbors yelling, sirens in the distance. But all that mattered was his. They were alive because Ranger had known. And he had acted without question, without fear. He had saved them. The investigation began the very next day. Firefighters and forensic teams sifted through the charred remains of the Husethi. Cause was clear. A gas leak from the home's old heating system. The pipes had corroded over years. A slow degradation no one had noticed until it was too late. The ignition point, they determined, had likely come from the kitchen, perhaps a spark from an old outlet. The blast had traveled fast, fed by the gas accumulating in the vents, a perfect storm of neglect and bad timing. But one detail stunned the investigators. The leak hadn't started the night of the explosion. Based on pressure readings and corrosion patterns, it had likely begun at least 2 weeks earlier. Leah and Daniel exchanged looks, and suddenly everything made sense. The pacing, the refusal to eat, growling at the vent, the scratching at the basement door, the way Ranger had blocked Ava from crawling near theater, every behavior they'd brushed off now rang in their ears like sirens. Lee felt a wave of guilt crash over her. I thought he was just aging, she whispered. Daniel looked down at his hands, and I thought he was being stubborn, moody. Booth was trying to tell us. Neither could look at each other for a long moment. The weight of realization was heavy, but underneath it was something else too. Gratitude. If Ranger hadn't acted when headed, if they had dismissed his final warning, they would have lost everything, and they knew it. That night, after Thechau's calmed, an emergency crews left. Lee knelt beside Ranger, who was resting in a blanket. In a neighbor's garage, she placed her hand gently on his head. Yauknu, you tried to warn us. I'm so sorry we didn't hear you. Ranger didn't move much, but his eyes met hers, and that was enough. The days that followed were quiet and full of ash. Their home was gone. Everything they owned, baby clothes, wedding photos, books, keepsakes, vanish head in flame. The insurance covered some oft loss, but not the ache of starting over. Still, they had each other, and they had Ranger. For a while they stayed in a small rental house on the edge of town. Leah spent her mornings watching Ava crawl across unfamiliar floors, while Daniel worked to rebuild their lives piece by piece. At night, the three of them would sit close together, always nearby, his presence a comfort, a reminder. Eventually, they made a decision. They would move not just from the rental, but away from the place that no carried so many memories of what was lost. They found a small town 2 horse north, quiet and full of trees, a place where Ava could grow up safe, where they could build not just a house, but a life. Their new home was simple, but it had a large backyard and a sunlit porch. The first thing they unpacked was Rur's blanket. He circled the porch once, then lay down as if to say, "We're okay now." And in that moment, they believed it. The trauma hadn't disappeared, but they had survived together. As weeks turned into months, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Ava grew stronger each day, her knee legs wobbling through first steps across the wooden floor of their new home. And always just a few feet away was Ranger, watchful, calm, steady. They became inseparable. Ava learned her first words beside his fur, "Tata, mama," and soon after, her way of saying shadow, the name she gave him, unaware of the name he once had. Every nap, she curled up against his side, every scraped knee, every burst of laughter. He was there. Ranger didn't just guard her, he witnessed her becoming. Lee often watched them from the porch, heartful eyes sometimes wet. There was something in the way Ava would place her hand on Rare's back, firm, trusting, as if she knew, even at 1 year old, that this being had carried her through fire. Daniel, too, softened in ways he didn't expect. At night, he sometimes found himself sitting beside Ranger, hand resting on his head, not as a thank you but as recognition. Man to dog, soul to soul. Their bond wasn't built on tricks or training. It wasn't even built on rescue, it was built on survival. Ranger had become more than family. He was Marie, he was protector. He was part of the very foundation they were rebuilding. And for Ava, he was the constant presence in a world that had already shown her both danger and deliverance. No words were needed, none ever would be. Life didn't return to what it was. It became a something different, quieter, slower, and maybe in some ways more whole. Leah and Daniel often spoke about the night of the explosion, not with fear, but with a they didn't just survive, they were spared, and not by luck, but by a creature who had once been deemed broken, a rescue dog who in truth had rescued them. Their story spread. Neighbors, then reporters, then people from other towns. Some wanted to donate, others just wanted to thank them for telling it. But for Leah, the most meaningful messages came from Thaswa. Said, "I looked at my dog differently today," or "I listened more closely." Thatch thought was the point. Animals speak not with words, but with presence, with action, with patience, and too often we're just too busy, too tired, too loud to heart them. Shadow had never needed to be fixed, it only needed Someone to believe in him, and, in return, he had become their protector, their savior, an irreplaceable part of their family. Now years later, Ava still sleeps beside her. Her hair has grown, her laugh louder, but she still rests her hand on his back, the same way as if anchoring himself to something ancient and true. People talk about miracles as things that defy logic, but Leah knows better. Sometimes a miracle is simply this: a dog with a broken past choosing to protect a future not his own, and doing it with the very thing he